Okay, so people ask the question, so what? Like, that all happened, that all finished when I was about 16, so why do we need to worry about this today? And we use this diagram to try and sum up how the past has impacted upon us today. So if you could imagine a line of well-being, and by well-being, what I mean, I don't mean how rich you are or how many cars you own or whatever, and I certainly don't mean what sort of lifestyle you're leading. So you could be leading a traditional nomadic lifestyle and have fantastic well-being. You could be leading a modern corporate lifestyle and have fantastic well-being, or vice versa, crap well-being in both. So what I mean is that personal human sense of internal personal power and freedom that you have on your good days and you wish you had on your bad days. Then Aboriginal people's well-being will have gone up and down, according to all manner of things. As you've seen, Aboriginal culture was incredibly structured, really very successful by most measures. But being human is a funny old journey, and we have our good days and our bad days, and our good years and our bad years, and I'm sure it went up and down according to how they're getting on with the mob and health and so on and so forth. But then non-Aboriginal people arrived, and the process of dispossession began and continued. And by dispossession, what I mean is the taking of something or the loss of something. So if I lose my wallet, or if I have my wallet taken from me, my well-being can go down for a few days. I've lost my credit cards, and I have to replace the credit cards, I have to replace the license, and for a few days you're walking around going, oh, bugger, the wallet. If I lose a loved one, I can go into a place of physical illness from the grief that I feel from the dispossession of a loved one, if you like. But by dispossession here, of course, we're talking about way more than the taking or loss of a wallet or of a loved one. We're talking about the taking or loss of land and home, the taking or loss of food supplies and clean water supplies, the taking or loss of freedom to move and freedom to associate with your loved ones, the taking or loss of physical health and physical safety and security, the taking or loss of language and law and authority and religion and culture. And of course we're talking about the taking or loss of mums and dads and children and grandchildren and grandparents and brothers and sisters, and that was all part of that nightmare of what we speak of as the stolen generations. Where you take so much that life is built on from people, clearly their well-being will go down. Generally their well-being will go down. Where you take it, not just from individuals, not just an individual here and an individual there, but from whole communities at a time, and generation on generation on generation, the miracle is that the human spirit survives. And for me, part of the privilege of working in this area is you start to get a glimpse of the resilience of the human spirit. Because around the world and across the centuries, people survive this sort of dispossession. But for me, it's particularly miraculous here in the West because, until recently, too many of our policies and practices were based around the idea that Aboriginal people would die out. So A.O. Neville said, let's poison them out. A.O. Neville said, let's breed them out. The writer of that telegram said, let's poison them out. But even old bleeding hearts like me back in the 30s were talking about smoothing the dying pillow. It was this profound assumption that Aboriginality meant you were dying out, you were set for extinction. But they didn't die out. It's this story of survival in our land. And after the Second World War, policies and practices began to change so that we're now on this really difficult, don't quite know how to do it journey towards a hope. And I actually think that today most Australians share this hope, towards a hope that all of us, including Aboriginal Australians, will have optimum levels of well-being. And it's worth taking a moment to say this is a really good thing. We used to base a lot of our policies and practices around that idea. Today we base them around this idea, and that's a huge step forward. So that today, Aboriginal people are all the way along what you might call this journey of healing and re-empowerment. So there's plenty of Aboriginal people with well-being way better than mine, but there's a lot of people caught down in this place here. And it's a dark and difficult place to be. Now, to some extent, all of us go through that in our life. We all might face a loss of a loved one, or a loss of a job, or a loss of a marriage. We might have mental illness ourselves, or mental illness in the family, or addiction problems in the family, and so But the complicating factor here is, as I said, where you dispossess not just an individual here, an individual there, but dispossess whole communities at a time and generation on generation on generation, you can get a kind of pit of despair that sets up where the traumas that were imposed on people in the past can start to become self-imposed. So that same dynamic you hear about, that the victim of abuse, say in childhood, can become the perpetrator of abuse later on. They don't always, but they can. The guts of it, as I understand all the research, the guts of it is what I don't heal in my own life, I can very easily pass on to my kids as an individual. Multiply that if everyone around me has been through that same trauma, and it's really hard to find the handleholds, if you like, to pull yourself out. You often talk to people in trauma, they say, oh, my loved ones are my rocks. Well, what if all the rock is sort of falling apart around you? In fact, those people around you can be sort of pulling you down again. So in this pit of despair that's set up, you get horribly high levels of violence, of substance abuse. Alcohol's obviously a big one, but drugs and petrol and glue and so on and so forth. Sorry to name it, but suicide, mortality. We've got 17 years difference here in the West between Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal mortality. It's one of the highest disparities in the world. Imprisonment and all that leads to that. Illness, child abuse, etc., etc., etc. So that even if we had total justice today, a lot of Aboriginal kids are born into this place here. And it's a traumatic place to be born into. And what we know more and more is that can actually sort of get the brain lined up for fight and flight, so that when their kids are born, they are born into a traumatic place as well. And it can actually get worse down the generations rather than better. So the work of A.O. Neville and the writer of that telegram can actually become worse and worse as it swirls around in this world. Now, a lot of us, I think, have turned away from this, both on the non-Aboriginal side and the Aboriginal side. We haven't wanted to talk about this stuff because, it can feel racist to even mention it, or on the Aboriginal side there's real shame about how much this is happening for people. And people say, oh, well, that's just the inevitable consequence of two such different cultures coming together. Or the worst thing you hear is, oh, that's culture. All that violence, that's culture, of course. It's not. It's what happens when you systematically dispossess a people. And the big question we've got to ask ourselves is, how do we actually turn around? How do we recover from that? We've all got to play a role in that recovery. Now, when I first started playing with this picture, because this is all me as a white boy trying to make sense of what I'm seeing around me, when I started playing with this picture and talking to Aboriginal friends and colleagues, a number of people said to me, Tim, I might have Wellbeing way up here, as an Aboriginal person. They said, I might have Wellbeing way up here, but I've got ropes down to this place here. And I am spending my life trying to pull people out, and it's real easy to get pulled back in. A racist comment in the street, a problem at work, cops picking up for driving a nice car, this mob telling you you're a coconut, back in the outside, white in the inside, or what are you doing working for that mining company? They're the ones who took our land away. And you can just think, you know what, bugger it. And you can just be pulled back into this place here. And what a lot of my Aboriginal friends have talked about who've been through this place is that when they were in here, it felt like this is where they belonged, because this is where the stereotype fits for Aboriginal people. So what does that mean for us Wodgers? One of the things, what can we do to sort of help change that picture? Well, for me, one of the key things we can do is stand solid with these incredibly important people here. Because the more Aboriginal people standing up here, and the more solid the ground they're standing on, the more those ropes will pull people that way, upward and outward, rather than this way, down into the darkness and the chaos. And for me, that's where the hope lies. It doesn't lie in big, broad blanket policies, because a lot of big, broad blanket policies treat these people the same as these people. It lies in support for the strong people. It might be Auntie Mary, it might be a political leader, it might be a young 16-year-old in your organisation, but who are actually really strong and trying to make a difference. Now the last thing I want to say about it is, for me, this diagram puts two challenges really. The first challenge, we've really got to listen to Aboriginal leadership on this first challenge, because the first challenge, quite obviously, is how do we speed that journey of healing and re-empowerment. And for me, we've got to be led by Aboriginal people. We've all got a role to play, but we've got to be led by Aboriginal people in that. The second challenge is one we can all play a leadership role in, just as much as Aboriginal people. Because the second challenge is, how do we build trust, how do we build relationship, how do we build partnership after the terrible mistrust and hostility that's been created by this history. And that's what I want to go on to in the next part of the training, how we actually start to rebuild that trust.